Carlos is smiling. He's probably seeing how I repurposed his icebreaker energizer here, right, Carlos? I'm never missing an opportunity to show off your great idea. Eric, long time.
Anna Maria, who are you? Recognizing voice from the past.
Welcome. And Hassan is here, Nang is here. Welcome everyone, make yourselves comfortable and do let me know. Agency PR makes me feel. How? Step your choice. How does it make you feel on this Nick Cajonator scale? Okay, Hassan, I echo your feelings, stressed. Carlos is like, bees, get away from me. What else? Yeah, it's the first time you got to use bees. There we go. It's quite extreme. Okay, Sue is there as well. Everyone. How does agency PR make you feel? Lucy probably spotting herself on carefree and relaxed and happy and my happy place. Right? We'll see about that. Let's see. Okay. So there's a clear sentiment here, Lucy. So we need you. This is a session that is needed in our life to shake off the mad bees and stressed feelings. Just Eric is feeling focused, laser focused on that, right? Yes, perfect. Now, what about building your personal brand? So we talk about agency and your business. How about you as a thought leader? We like that word. You as a thought leader, personal brand. How is it? Is it easy? Is it hard? Plot yourself on this continuum. All right. Lydia and Lucy are first like, hey, that's what I do. Some of us are in the middle. Hi Dan, nice to see you here. Okay. While the majority, hey Paul, really cool to have you here. And the majority are towards the hard parts. All right, so this is the fireside chat, which means that we all get to pick Lucy's brain for the next hour. She did mention that though. So don't hold back, bring your answers. We're a small group. Feel free to use the queue up button to queue up and ask your questions. We're going to use that to very structuredly manage the conversations, the questions here. And if you cannot unmute, you're in a busy place, whatever, feel free to use the chat and I'll surface those questions for us. Keep them stems coming, and I am killing the music here because I want to welcome Lucy in the room. Yup. Hey.
Hello.
You probably know who Lucy is by now. I've been following her online, and you know she's writing books. She's busy. She's a busy lady, and she helps founders get famous. That's what we want. We all want to get famous. And she's managing her business, the Wern, a PR and design consultancy, and she also has her Hype Yourself platform, which is some sort of like the do-it-yourself twin of the Wern. She's written 2 best-selling books, Hype Yourself and Brand Yourself, and she also launched there we go. We see them in the image. She also launched a new course on Domestika. So if what you're hearing today leaves you thirsty for more, feel free to check out that course. We'll pop a link in the chat as well. She has an amazing newsletter that she writes on a monthly basis, and she has been named a Startup 21 Most Influential Woman of 2021 and the Dots 100 Rising Stars 2 years in a row. Hello. Give it up for Lucy. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation to join us today. And please, we're really looking forward to hear your thoughts. So Anything that I've missed, Lucy, that you want to add up to who you are?
No, if you want to intro me anytime I walk into a room, that would be great. I think you got it all. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Opening the chat here. Right. Welcome, everyone. If you're joining us late, we're just kicking it off with Lucy. This is a fireside chat. So I'll just pull up Lucy in the panel of the top and myself. And we'll welcome everyone that has any questions to use the Q button to the left side of the screen, queue up so we can welcome you in the spotlight and kickstart this conversation. And I obviously have a long list of questions for you, Lucy. So let's start there and warm us up.
Okay.
And I'll start with a general one, a broad one, and you can pull any thread you want. In your book, Hype Yourself, you talk about this importance of creating a media strategy, a PR strategy. So how can agencies craft that PR strategy that generates this hype and positive media coverage? And I am aware that that's a general one, so that's why I mentioned pull any kind of thread you like just to kick us off.
Yeah. So I think there's sort of three pieces to that answer. So I would always start off with actually aligning your PR strategy to your business and marketing strategy. So quite often people start their PR strategy by going, I just want to be on the front page of Campaign magazine, for example, rather than going, oh, I need to attract new business, or I'm trying to attract talent, or I'm trying to attract investment, or whatever the business goal is. So when you kind of know what your business goal is, that then kind of takes you to the next step, which is, okay, so how am I going to reach that audience with my business goal? Where do I need to be doing PR? And then, so once you've kind of done this sort of the strategy work, or kind of, matching up where it is you need to be going and aligning your PR goals against, something that's actually going to help your business. Because for most of us, we are time poor. So if we're going to spend time doing PR, we want it to work hard for us. Then there's kind of like the media toolkit part. So that's, for me, that's kind of getting all of your assets ready, making sure you've got bios, making sure you've got headshots, making sure you've got written material. And I'd say the bit that that makes my soul die a bit inside is when agencies are like, oh, I've got this great new work. We need to write a press release and send it out. And for me, that's actually really boring. For me, I'd be looking at something way more interesting, like rather than just talking about your work, like talking about the trends or the news, or finding a way to kind of hijack the news agenda and writing a bespoke pitch to journalists, as opposed to a cut and paste press release that gets sent out to a media list. So in terms of a good strategy and tactics, I think there's so many opportunities now there wasn't before. Like when I started off in PR, not to like date myself, but like when I was in work experience, I was faxing press releases out and walking like printouts of press coverage to offices. And now we have Google and we can find like any journalist on Twitter. And it's not, for me, PR isn't just about getting yourself into a magazine, which is publicity. It's one strand of it. It's all the things that we can be doing to raise our profile in the public space. So it's being on a podcast, it's speaking on a panel event like this, it's speaking at a networking leadership article, it's being called upon as a guest expert by broadcast media when there's something happening in your industry. So for me, the bit that's actually more interesting is the thought leadership piece by founders.
Whew, thanks. I have many threads to pull from there, actually. Yeah. And I'm happy that you gave a couple of examples of what PR, how can it come to life? Because I've heard a lot about personal, I don't have an agency, so obviously this is a bit the foreign terrain for me. But whenever we talk about PR, the first thing that comes to mind is that press release, and I think like there must be something else out there on how to get and build a hype around that. So thank you for those couple of examples that you brought, and you mentioned this thought leadership of the agency owners or the exec, the founder, the CEO, etc. And I wonder what are some tips, tricks, advice, things that you've probably seen work really well for folks when it comes to building their thought leadership platform and become recognized experts in their field, in their industry?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the risks that we have is trying to talk about too many things, and then it's difficult to be known for one or two things. So I kind of am quite keen for people to kind of pick 2 or 3 topics that they really want to take ownership of, and then to use that not just in terms of like the topic of a talk, but the topic of articles they write, the topic of for a podcast guest. When I kind of think about PR, I'm always trying to get people to think about like headlines. So kind of owning like 2 or 3 headlines for yourself of like, these are the and another way that we can kind of do that is actually to reverse engineer it. So set up something like Google Alerts around the topics that we want to talk about, and make sure that we're always sharing news in that space, that we're reacting to it, that we're learning who are the people who are also talking about those topics, whether that's journalists or other thought leaders, and start positioning ourselves alongside them. So it's not this kind of big overnight, sales drive, or, suddenly overnight I'm going to be on all broadcast channels and be known internationally. It's a very slow kind of micro brand building piece that you just kind of over time become known for. So, now I'm kind of I set up my agency 8 years ago, but I probably only focused on my own profile 4 years ago. And it probably took me 2 to 3 years to really start to see that tipping point of actually being invited and paid as an expert in that space. And this is like somebody who does it for other people for a living. So I wouldn't expect anybody else to be able to do it overnight either. It's just keeping that consistent with it. And it can evolve, of course. Like, you don't necessarily just want to have the same topic in your artillery, but just keeping it quite sort of refined.
So how do we do it on a very super practical level, maybe with a couple of examples? Because I very much resonated with this owning a few headlines. How do we do that? Like, do I go and build a hashtag? Do I go and use, I don't know, a certain type of emoji in my name everywhere you're looking for? Like, how do I actually make sure that people over time, of course, start to associate me with those topics, like some very practical things you've seen working?
So I think actually the key piece is actually making sure that we have a tendency, all of us, particularly if we know a topic really well, to lose the kind of that outsider's perspective on what's important and what's going to create cut through. So actually I talk quite a lot about using AI as like an editorial assistant. So I use like Copy AI or ChatGPT, and I'll sort of say like, I want to talk about these topics in this space. What's a way of making this a bit punchier? So I kind of get it to like zhuzh my language a bit. And even in a sense, like with my first book, Hype Yourself, I think the working title for that when I pitched the proposal was something like How to PR Yourself, or something really dry. And they were like, you can't, it's so boring. You've got to do better than that. And it took me ages, because I remember at the time, I think it was around the time that Sheryl Sandberg had Lean In. So I was like, I need like a 2-word like headline. And it was then that somebody kind of said to me, oh, you're always hyping people. You're like the hype queen. And I was like, oh, it sounds like help. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to hype this. And it kind of like sort of came over time. Obviously, that was when I wrote it was pre-AI. Obviously, I could have put it in then. It probably would have done a much better job for me.
Oh, you'll be surprised.
Doing it faster. So I think owning a few sort of punchy headlines is a good place to start. Looking at, again, like what we were saying, like where your audience is or how you can engage with them. So pitching workshops. I quite often talk to people about doing topics, doing lessons, in like co-working spaces or shared office spaces where your target audience might be, as a way just to do an introduction. I really like platforms like Courier magazine, which is an international modern business publication, which takes a lot of guest experts within conferences as well. So I kind of, when I wanted to work with them as a magazine, I pitched myself, and then in the end I hosted my own panel event, and I invited the journalists that I wanted to make relationships with be on my panel event. And so then when they did a conference, they brought me back on. So I kind of find like ways to be like, okay, if they don't want me, how can I make them how can I do it the other way round? The magazine is called Courier Media. I normally have one in the background, but my office is currently being done up, so I don't have one with me right now. But if you Google like Courier Media, it's normally like the taglines like the modern business magazine, and they have a weekly newsletter, and they're actually really great at showcasing like creative business owners. So that for me is like a good place to be. I think when I first started out in publicity, most of the business publications were quite dry and quite corporate and quite suited, and I think now there's a lot more kind of creative entrepreneur platforms as well out there, and even like brands like yourself who are hosting events, who host things with entrepreneurs who might have a podcast or might have a blog or might have a newsletter, like things like MailChimp. They're another one that I was doing a lot of work with for a while. I do a lot of stuff with Adobe. So for me, I kind of find brands as well that kind of also talk to that small business creative audience that I can associate with. So I think it kind of depends. Like I think a lot of people are guilty. Like I did this as myself when I set up a PR consultancy. I only went to PR titles, which was ridiculous because all I was doing was kind of showing off in front of my peers, but it wasn't helping me get new business or talent or like anything other than it was just. So I kind of went back to my business goals of like, who am I actually talking to? And I definitely had these two different audiences between like my agency and the DIY side. And now, because I'm about 8 weeks off giving birth, which is why there's some heavy breathing every now and again. It's not that I'm just hideously overexcited to talk to you. I'm focusing more on the DIY side. So a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is in that space as well, in the kind of the small business freelancer area. So it's really important to know who you are actually trying to reach, and then think about all the places and spaces that you can reach them. And most of the time, for me at least, and from what I've seen with the clients I've worked with, getting the traditional publicity, like getting into articles, into newspapers and magazines, is great for kudos and it's great for brand building. But if you're looking to do more kind of like commercial objectives like driving sales, then quite often things like public speaking or being on a podcast works so much harder for you because people are connecting to what you're saying. They have that emotional connection with you. So again, if we're time poor, it's kind of playing to our strengths a bit. And sometimes for me, I see it work in really odd ways. Like I can write a blog post. I wrote a blog post on how I tried to be a Sunday Times business bestseller and failed. And that got picked up by a non-fiction podcast. So we talked about all the reasons why I failed to sell loads of books. And then off the back of that, I got booked for 2 or 3 PR mentoring sessions with book authors who wanted me to talk them through how, I guess, not to do it like me. And then off the back of that, one of them then shouted me out on LinkedIn, and the publishing company now want me to do a program for or started off with this one blog post. So that's why I think it's always like good to think about telling your fails as well as your wins and telling your journey.
So I want to stop here. Thank you so much. I want to stop here for any questions that you want to either through the queue or in the chat. That you want to ask Lucy. And before you kind of put your thoughts in order, or while you put your thoughts in order, I'm curious. It's clear that it has this kind of compounding effect, right? I mean, you already have a brand, so you're already quite well known. And I wonder, going back to that, after we identified where is it that your target audience spends time in, how do we pitch ourselves? Like, let's imagine we're at the beginning of the journey. We don't really have a big audience, or probably not well known. What are some good best practices on how do I pitch myself to speak in a podcast, or how do I pitch me like to have a talk at an event, etc. Anything you can share with us there. And then please, everyone, feel free to ask your questions in the chat. Otherwise, I'll keep on. I have so many things to ask, Lucy. So,
so actually, I write quite a lot on Medium at the moment, more just for fun. And I've actually written an article like specifically on how to do a podcast pitch. But really, any kind of pitch is very similar for me, which is for the British people, it's quite awkward, but literally just cutting straight to it. No, hi, how are you? This is the weather. Let's have a cup of tea. Literally, like, and I've been on the receiving end as well. Like when you're busy and you're getting kind of requests, because if ultimately the person on the other side is sort of doing you the favor because they are exposing you to their audience. So your job as the pitch person is to make it quick and easy as to why they should be featuring you. So I literally would go straight in with like, this is who I am. This is what I can talk about. This is the benefit for your audience. Thank you very much. And then underneath that kind of pitch email, I'll have my bio and maybe additional information. So if it's a podcast, I might do some links to some of the bigger podcasts I've been on just to demonstrate that I can usually talk without sounding like I've got some kind of like dirty phone call fetish happening. If I'm pitching for writing, same thing. I don't write a lot for magazines and newspapers. I have a couple, but quite often they're in print. But so I'll link to online articles I've done just on Medium, or before I used to have it on my own blog. So it wasn't anywhere sort of special, but just to demonstrate that I could string a sentence together in the written form. So yeah, I always think it's good to kind of reference a few examples. And if you're starting out from scratch, then I'd always encourage you to try and host some material of your own, even if it's on your own platform, just to show that you can do something, even if it's a short video that's just on your website or on a landing page that's private, but just so that the person on the other side can see how it is that you speak. And I always liken pitching, a good pitch, to a little bit like somebody who's applying to do work experience with you. Like you can tell the people who have just sort of cut and paste and the fonts are different sizes and it's clearly just gone out to like a list of like 300 people versus maybe somebody who's like, hey, I've been following you for a while and I've seen you've worked with this person and I also really like this brand for me, it's like you can just really tell from that intro if somebody knows you or not. And I think it's the same. One of my favorite is a guy called Louis Grenier, and he runs a podcast called Everyone Hates Marketeers. And he did a big rant the other day about PR agencies, which I kind of enjoyed because I'm slightly, although I am sort of one, I also sort of hate them at the same time. But he did a piece about how terrible they were at pitching for his podcast, and clearly they hadn't listened to it. And I think that's probably my golden rule, is actually instead of having a press release and this huge media list, is actually going, okay, who are the 2 to 5 podcasts I want to be on, and actually listen to them and get to know it, and then really feel like, when you're pitching to them, it's not like, oh, I really enjoyed your episode with Lucy Werner. Like it's actually a genuine like love and affection for the show, because I think it really makes a difference.
Awesome. Thank you. And Paul is asking, is there a place to visit where we can find a podcast date, or is it just a matter of us going on the research and seeing where are the people talking about the topics that are our topics, our headlines, right, that we identified for ourselves?
Yeah. So I think there are databases that exist. They normally cost quite a lot, and then I think you end up with a generic person. So I definitely would say it's actually better to just clear yourself however you work. So if you're a batch person or you're a little bit every day, just take some time to actually research podcasts in your space and get to know them. And also when you listen to them, you'll then get an understanding of normally if they're working with a producer, if they're taking guests themselves, or how it kind of works. So I would definitely say it's actually better to do that research yourself rather than to take it from a list. Sorry, it's not a quick win, but it is the best way.
Know that networking or building relationships can have a compounding effect to getting in front of the right audiences or the right opportunities, right, that you're almost creating for yourself. And have you used this networking in a very tactful way, like very strategic? And how does that look like approaching people? Where do you find them? How do you reach out, get your foot in the door?
I think when I wrote my first book, my strategy was to try and make friends with people who had a much more influential follower size than me. And what I started to realize was actually the people who had the smaller followings but were super niche were working so much harder for me and on the book sales than maybe somebody who had 250,000 followers or something, versus I was like, oh, these people who've got like 200 or 300 are actually really, I can see when they're talking about it, the line on Amazon Author Central, like going straight up. So I kind of already knew it anyway. And I was always saying this to other founders, but I was like, try not to be led by your ego and actually try to be really strategic in your partnership and almost think of yourself as a global conglomerate, but think of like, who are my sister agencies? So if you're in an HR agency, who's your finance agency? Who's your legal agency? Who's your PR agency? Who's your marketing? And look to collaborate with the people who talk to the same audience, but in a similar space. So definitely, I think there's a bit of that. I think on social media, we can definitely get a bit distracted by our competitors and our peers sometimes. So sometimes if I feel like I'm in a bit of a bit crowded or in a bit I'm seeing the same people at the same talks and in the same spaces, I'll start trying to find new people that I talked about Louis to you guys, but I don't talk about my love for him publicly because I don't want other people to go and play with him as well. He's just for me and you guys. But it's also, I've got an invested interest because I've just moved to France and he's French, so I've got a bit of a he's like a French in England cross section. So I'm into the kind of the international European swapping scene at the moment. That my husband's sat there, not like that. but yeah, so I think it's sometimes it is good to talk about how you get the opportunities and to put the spotlights on others, but also just hold a little bit back, hold a few connections back for yourself and a few relationships back for yourself, so you can have your own space.
Thank you. All right, friends, any questions for Lucy? Maybe if I stop talking for a minute, someone will unmute. No?
I'm going to pull
just
out
the crickets.
I'm going to pull out my Medium article on podcast pitching whilst it's quiet.
Pop it in the chat. I'm curious, maybe Lucy, if you could share maybe some of the people you've worked with, or we're all at different journeys in our personal branding journey, different stages in the journey, to better say.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of us they either feel uncomfortable, and kind of personal branding feels a lot like self-promotion, and that might feel uncomfortable for some of us, or like, I've got nothing to say. I would like to share, but I don't know what would I talk about. There are so many other smart folks around there in that space. So is there any advice you have for us that will kind of, I don't know, break these mental models that we're carrying with us, that we've got nothing to share, or it's like, I can't be self-promotional? And what would you share with us?
So I think, first of all, the word personal brand and PR to a certain extent, but personal brand definitely needs like a PR revamp. Like I think it's got horrid connotations next to it. So does self-promotion. But again, because we are in this digital age, we all generally have a digital footprint. So when people are doing a due diligence on an agency, probably one of the first things they're going to be doing is Googling. And if they are meeting different founders and they're thinking about what it's going to be like to work with them, then there's a good chance that they're going to be Googling you. So for me, there's kind of you have a personal brand, whether you like it or not. So it's really just your choice as to whether or not you want to have any control over to what's found there. So for me, it's thinking about, what do I want people to find when they Google my name? Is it my MySpace photo? No. Because Google loves MySpace. For the people in the room who know what that is, quite often I'm talking to rooms where people are like, what is that? Thank you for making me feel super old.
I think you're safe here.
Okay.
I totally know what it is.
Yay! You're all super old with me. But Google loves Twitter. Google loves YouTube. So even if you're not heavily proactive on those channels, just having a bit of a billboard account there and just putting an image is a great way just to kind of hack that search. I'm a massive fan of the hashtag journey request, which is used on Twitter quite a lot in the UK. I'll pop that in the chat because whenever I say it, I don't manage to say it with any kind of eloquence. Journey request. Yes, I can start. And the reason I like that is because you'll see various different journalists use it to put a call out for requests. I've used it a lot for my clients and for myself to get press coverage. And again, I think it's how you respond to those journal requests. So the Brits amongst us can typically be extremely awkward and be like, oh, yes, I could answer that. Please do let me know if I can help you further. Versus the people who go, I can answer that. What's your email address? I'm going to send it to you right now, and literally have the answer in the headline. And I've definitely been able to kind of snag pieces for my clients because I'll be like, yes, I have an answer to your piece and a really great image to go with it, because that's also making their job easier because they can literally lift the photo or image straight away into their piece. Actually, a landscape headshot is probably one of my favorite hacks in terms of founders PR, because if a journalist is collating lots of different responses and you're the only one that sends a landscape one, it's normally the one that's put at the top of the piece. So you can dominate the article, but it also works really well for print publications as well. What was the question again? Sorry, my pregnancy mashed potato brain went off on a photo tangent. Pitching.
The question was...
She's also got a mashed potato brain.
Because I have to think ahead. The question was, I think, folks that are...
Yeah. So journey request is also good because you're just responding to the journalist requests as opposed to having to pitch yourself out there. Actually, there's a really good one. Hold on, I'm going to pop this into the chat. I set this as a challenge this morning in a room I was in for people not to even necessarily pitch, but just to practice pitching. So I'm going to pop this in the chat. This is from a journalist who's put a call out for submissions for a publication called Muse. So she's looking for work and career articles, and she very specifically spells out how she wants to be pitched to, the sort of topics that she's interested in, and then things that have done well in the past. And so for me, I was like, every founder could be pitching for this, because whatever your type of business is, you have business expertise, like how you found your first employee, how you found your distributor, how you got funding, how you bootstrapped, how you built your first website, how you skill swapped to get your first headshot, whatever it is, everybody here has got business expertise. And sometimes telling the stories of how you've grown your business is more interesting and generates more sales than actually saying, oh, this is the latest piece of creative work I've done, or this is my latest client win. Sorry, the dog got excited then at that answer.
Yay!
So yeah, for me, there's 3 pots that every founder can talk about. So the first pot is always business expertise. Like top 10 tips, how I went from X to Y, how I overcame. The middle pot is kind of the more personal, I guess, which is what I call like the human interest piece. So lots of newspapers and magazines and podcasts are looking over adversity. for many of us who are agency owners, there's usually a reason that we set up on our own. So sometimes there's a bit of a backstory there. So that can be really interesting. And the last point is what I call, the last bucket, I guess, is what I call passion points. So I always try and get every founder to think of themselves like a magazine. So I don't mean like literally like, oh, hi, I'm Vogue. I mean, but think of like all of your content that is PRable like a magazine. And typically agencies focus only on news in writing a press release and wanging that out. You've actually got your news, you've got features, you've got opinions, the kind of that guest column piece. And then the passion points piece for me is that kind of the equivalent of the horoscope and recipe pages. So somebody earlier was like, oh, I got in The Economist talking about how I adopted chickens in lockdown. And I was like, perfect. She got a plug for her business in there. She was able to say she was in The Economist. Nobody knows other than the people in that room that it was about chickens. But it was just, she was showing a little bit of her personality and her kind of personal brand, if you like, but it's not showing like what it, you know, the inside of her house or what she's eating for lunch or about her family. So sometimes we have these sort of things of, you know, what it is that we're doing alongside our careers that are actually a great way to secure coverage. So I think the best piece I've ever had for myself was like 800 words on my business. And it was in the Times, but it was actually in the property section of the Times talking about how I was able to pivot my business in lockdown and move to France. So it's still about my business. It's still about the books. There was still a little bit of, you know, my personal life in there because I'm obviously like mentioning, but the photo founder of my children, but we my husband, but I just feel that word still is just a bit weird for me. So co-founder of my children.
I love the co-founder.
It was my business first.
I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna use that.
Do take it.
It was my business first.
Yeah, and that's my like little bit of showing, what I call showing a bit of ankle. It's like showing a bit of who you are, but you don't have to reveal everything. So it was just a photo of me and him in our office together, not like a family photo with the kids. Like they were, obviously the Times were like, can we have a family photo and name your children? And I was like, no, thank you. But and that's fine. They still ran the piece, and that was sort of years, you know, 7 years after I launched the business that I got that piece. And that was from a journo request where somebody was like, has anybody been able to make a significant property move from their business success? And so I went in with, we had to pivot our business in the pandemic. And we ended up like relocating to the south of France rather than going, these are the stats of my business success, which is because obviously I had that PR head on when she interviewed me. I ended up kind of interviewing her back and being like, how many people pitched? Why did you pick me over the others? Any tips for like people moving forward? And so the amount of people who just led with, these are all the reasons why my business is successful, as opposed to what the human piece is. So definitely do like think where possible, how the things that you're doing in your life that you feel happy to talk about and how they might relate to your business could work for a story. And then when you see that journo request pop up, you're like, okay, yeah, that's me. And because I do a thing on the Sunday, it's like my Sunday supplement called Notes from France, where I just bullet point, like, still haven't got my long-term visa, still waiting to move my car from French to English. Like, it's nothing.
Hashtag struggles.
Yeah, nothing that interesting. But now, anytime a journalist talks about somebody moving out of the UK, I'll always get tagged in it because people know that's like become like something I'm known for as well.
Top of mind.
Paul's just said, it's about finding little nuggets of PR momentum that build over time. Yay or nay? Absolutely yay. Absolutely. It's totally that. Being consistent with it.
Right. Paul's got it. Chris, over to you for a question.
My question was, what do you feel like makes the distinction between self-promotion and coming off as salesy? I guess this is a question within a question, but I feel like it's difficult in a conversation sometimes to self-promote yourself when you feel like what you're saying sometimes is very much about you, but then you feel like you're also coming off as salesy?
In terms of like on social media, do you mean, or
In social media and in real life.
yeah, I mean, I guess like in real life, I don't ever like sell. Like, so today, I mean, I really enjoy doing talks when I'm heavily pregnant, because it's the last thing I want is any clients. So that's actually it's quite enjoyable time. Whenever I do a talk and I'm pregnant, people are like, don't sell from the stage. And I'm like, I literally can't think of anything worse. So it's fine. Don't worry about it. But generally, I don't sell unless I kind of just try and give a bit of a flavor of what my expertise are. And by giving, generally, then if people think, oh, I might want to work with her, they'll come to me afterwards. So then I don't feel like I need to be too self-promotional or too salesy, because I'm just literally sharing advice. So when I started to build my personal brand, if you will, I think I just gave a free piece of advice every single day for a year before I actually asked for any kind of sale, which was then for the book. Now I do sometimes feel awkward more because on the DIY side, I am selling a lot. There is a complete direct correlation between how many online courses or seats I sell to a workshop or book sales and how much I am selling on social media. So I know that I need to do it. But I always just try and stick to my values and think about, like, one of my values is about being fun. So whenever I sell, I try and do it in a fun way. So I might be mocking up a stupid photo, or like today I was posting about 300 reviews of my book. So I got the co-founder to mock up a front cover of the like 300 film with him holding my book instead of a weapon. So I'm always like trying to find ways that like do it in a fun way. So then if nothing else, at least I laugh. It doesn't matter if there's tumbleweed from everybody else. But there's actually a nice piece of advice by Daniel Priestley, who has a book called Key Person of Influence. And he always talks about the people who are real kind of key people of influence. They're not putting the spotlight on them, they're putting the spotlight on other people. And I think that's always a really helpful thing to do. So rather than you talking about how great your product is, you let your client testimony, you get other people to sort of shout you out, and you share like what other people are saying about you, rather than you having to say, I'm amazing. But like, I've been doing it for 20 years and I still felt awkward when I was introduced to the room today, because I was like, that's too many nice things in a row. The Brit in me cannot stand it. Please stop. So I think this is normal. It's normal. And I've had 20 years of pitching and rejection as well. So, and I still find it awkward.
All right, Carissa, give us a thumbs up. Yep. All right, Carlos, over to you. Jessica, are you pressing here? Yeah.
Hey, Lucy, great chat so far. Like, I'm really, really enjoying it. So, and I'm based in Toronto. I know a few faces here, so it's great to be here and love hearing this. I'm going to land the plane. I'm just going to give a little context first, but if that's okay. But so just starting on sort of, and I know the distinction between PR and content marketing. I think there seems to be an overlap, because social media is, of course, the medium perhaps that we can deliver a lot of the sort of the PR piece. But just starting out on that journey, lots of stuff out there to kind of read. I loved what you shared about your journey, in terms of how long you were in business, how long you were established, how long you actually started to get out there. And my question is, given reflecting on your own journey and also the work that you do with a lot of your clients, for folks that are starting it, and of course, my main objective is sales generations and lead generation, right? For the work that we do, we have a lot of fun, lots of great testimonials, but it's kind of increasing that sort of pipeline. As you reflect on your journey and your clients, what is almost like the investment that's made over time, perhaps, to really start getting those, really developing those nice quality relationships with folks that kind of then translate into sort of sales and leads and sales. Does that make sense, the question?
Yeah. So I think it's one of the things I actually hate about PR is it's very untrackable. it's very archaic. You really enjoyed that point.
Yeah, exactly.
But I know kind of on an arbitrary level, like what has worked. So I know, for example, I still get people coming to me now from when I spoke on the Courier magazine stage versus I wrote an article for Courier magazine and nobody ever says, oh, I read your article. But I'm really proud of that article because that's like an ego piece for me. I landed like the biggest podcast I ever have done at the end of last year, which is with a branding guy based in the US called Chris Doe. And if you don't know him, he's got like a couple of million like followers. And I got that because when I was sat next to him, I very casually was like, oh, I bought it wasn't my branding one, it was my PR one. I was like, oh, I've got this for you. It's a gift. If it's no good for you, like give it to your audience. And off the back of that, I definitely saw like an influx of leads and traffic coming through. And subsequently, like in that interview, we were talking about him being pitched here, and he kind of, I guess, gave a lot of the same advice that I would give to you guys, which is like, know that person, engage with that person. And so I think it's identifying the opportunities and the people who can help move that dial for you. But from my experience, nothing works faster than public speaking and podcasts, because it's just that it's something about hearing your voice and hearing you talking and sharing your story that works harder. So I would definitely, even if you were going to only pick one channel, start looking at like how you could be speaking at events or on panels or on podcasts, and go, I'd go chips in on that if I was a betting person.
That makes a lot of sense. Like it resonates. If I could add just a follow-up question here is, you know, of course, the pitching, you want the followers of whoever you're actually pitching that podcast to kind of really amplify your messaging. Barring that, in the meantime, you know, I think you mentioned something earlier about, you know, just put a video or a recording of yourself or on your site. That's not the same thing. I'm clear around that, but I love that medium for maybe kind of delivering that sort of the quality of who you are, your personality, potentially, all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense then?
Yeah, definitely. Right? And I think it's also that piece of like, hey, maybe I've heard you on a podcast, but I wasn't utterly sure. So then I go to look you up, and then, oh, there's a video on your website, or there's a YouTube channel and there's content there. Every time I see somebody do a kind of like content marketing presentation, the number changes between how many times somebody has to see you before they feel compelled to want to buy from you. But so I'm just like, just get yourself out there. It's clearly a good thing. There's always research on it. And I think showing that you are in a range of different spaces and places just gives people that confidence. But I think there's no shame as well in doing that on your own platform. And I think one of the things that I see people miss quite a lot is actually thinking about, okay, who else has a newsletter or who else has a blog on their platform that I could contribute to?
Makes sense. This is awesome.
All right. I think we've got time for one last question. Let's see. No, because I've got one. If not,
go on, you go.
So I'm curious, Lucy, do we all have to be on TikTok? Do we all need to do short videos? Do we all need to screenshots or tweets and put them as carousels on LinkedIn? Like, tell us about the emerging upcoming trends in this whole PR, personal branding. Anything we need to keep an eye out to be ahead of the curve?
So I'm going to be very, going to be very subjective based on my own sort of thing. I have an account on every platform, and I have the same name on every account, so that I am searchable, and I try to have a matching bio and a headshot. I'm not active on every social media channel. Like I said, I just kind of use it as a sort of a billboard. For me, I used to use Instagram a lot more. I'm kind of moved, and I used to keep sort of LinkedIn for agency and Instagram for the DIY side. Now I kind of use LinkedIn probably more on the DIY side, because it's just over time, as I've started to host more things, and I'll be like, where did you find me? And I just noticed there was a shift in my audience. I think you have to kind of really be like clear on also which channel you enjoy. So I know someone who is quite a very sort of straight-laced investor and gives investor tips on TikTok, not in one of those like dodgy teenage, I'm with a sports car type ways, but it works super well for him as a medium. And he's in Mayfair in the morning and doing his little posh video, and then chucks it out there, and it works really well for him. And I wouldn't have necessarily, if he'd come to me and said, which social media channel should I go on for my own investing platform, I wouldn't have necessarily gone, yeah, TikTok. So as founders, especially if we're working on our own publicity and we're not outsourcing it, it's got to be somewhere that we enjoy, because otherwise we're just going to burn out. So I think pick the one that sort of works best for you. But certainly from a professional capacity, obviously LinkedIn works quite well. I really enjoy Twitter for the journalists and for seeing like the tweet I posted earlier where there's somebody asking for articles. I'm not massively proactive on there. I tend to just sort of cut and paste bits as and when. So you kind of need to just find the sort of the one that fits for you and your audience. But I'd say enjoying what you're doing and enjoying your own content is kind of a bit of the magic, really, because otherwise it's not fun for anybody.
So I think that the general advice whenever it's about exploring things, like just go out there, experiment and see what happens. But I feel that with social media, you can't really just experiment for a month and be like, oh, this doesn't work for me, right? Because you really need to be there and invest a certain amount of time and experiment within the medium with formats or how the content looks like or feels like or how it lands in order to be like, this is my spot, works for me or doesn't work for me. So that's why I find it hard. It's like, okay, like at what point do we experiment with stuff, but when do we know that it's not working, and how much do we have to be there in order to actually see some results? So there's a bit of a challenge there. So you would say pick one platform where your customers are at and where you enjoy spending time. Yeah.
Good night, Paul. Thanks for staying up for me.
All right. Well, that was it. We're approaching the end of the talk, and I'm closing this off with a bit of I used to think, and now I think. So what were some beliefs, some mental models, some things that you used to have, and Lucy managed to bend them a little bit, change them a little bit? How does that takeaway look like? I used to think ... and now I think ... and I'm keen to see what replies do we get here. It's a poll. You have to type in your answer straight away, and it will reach us on the other side. And also our next session, I'm popping the link in the chat for those of you that want to follow us there. Lucy, thank you so much for accepting my invitation out of the blue. How was my pitch? Was it a good pitch?
You had a good pitch. You had a good pitch.
Anna Maria, you're gonna have to share that.
I have to say, I'm more and more surprised at how many awesome people say yes to my messages that are randomly falling out of the blue in their inbox or on their LinkedIn, and Lucy was one of them. So I like, okay, I think I'm getting the hang of this.
You know what, as well, for everybody in this room, they can actually reverse engineer and then pitch back at you.
Yeah, I'm pitchable. I'm open to be pitched. So if anyone wants to host any events, I'm super definitely.
There you go.
PR was a dark art, and it's just more boring consistency. There we go.
You know what, I actually think it's true, and it's also like a little bit like being a professional stalker.
Yes, it feels like that at times. All right. Anything else? Keep them coming. And what I'll do as well is enable the soundboard for all of us to use it to thank Lucy for her time, making time to be with us today. Hit those sounds for